Welcome to the introductory lecture for the endocrine system for Dr. Camp and Dr. Ross for the Anatomy and Physiology 2 class. This audio presentation should help you identify the general functions of the endocrine system, define hormone and gland. Also, by using this presentation in combination with your book and the materials we've loaded onto Blackboard, you should be able to find and label the gross anatomical structures of the endocrine system on the anatomical models that we've uploaded. You should also be able to identify the names and major functions of the hormones secreted by each of these organs. So the endocrine system is basically composed of multiple glands that produce and receive signals. And that allows the coordination of many physiological processes in the body. For example, metabolism, reproduction, sexual development. These are all things that are going to be controlled by the endocrine system. Other things are controlled by that as well. These are just a couple examples. So the molecules that send these messages or carry these messages are called signal molecules. We see this type of communication in the nervous system. In this case, a neurotransmitter is the signal molecule that transmits a message from a neuron across a synapse. Other types of signaling happens in the body where the message is transmitted from one organ to another. In this case, a hormone is the signal molecule that carries a signal from one organ to another by traveling through the blood. It should be no surprise that all organs in the body interact with at least one hormone. And you should know that these hormones have far-reaching effects in the body, and they can produce many complex changes, both structurally and physiologically. So just to talk about these hormones a little more before we move on, a hormone's endocrine gland is the organ or tissue that produces and secretes the hormone into the blood, while a hormone's target organ or tissue is the organ or tissue that responds to signals from that hormone. So the endocrine gland secretes the hormone, the target organ responds to that hormone, okay, in a nutshell. So again, I want to stress that any organ or tissue that produces or secretes a hormone into the blood is acting as an endocrine gland. So keep that in mind as we move through the endocrine section. So there are 10 glands defined as part of the endocrine system. 3 of them do double duty and perform vital functions in other systems, and you should notice these as we move through this list. So these 10 organs include the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the pineal gland, the adrenal gland, the pancreas, the parathyroid gland, the ovary, the testes, these are both gonads, the kidneys, and the heart. Some of these we have just recently discussed in the urinary section. So other organs, so there are other organs that we've studied in this semester that also have endocrine activity that were not on those lists. So for example, the stomach would be one. The stomach secretes the hormone gastrin, and recall that that plays an important role in control of gastric acid secretions. The small intestine is another example. It secretes secretin, which stimulates secretion of bicarbonate-rich fluids from the pancreas and liver. I also want to take a quick second here just to talk about the thymus. So the thymus is part of the lymphatic system. Hopefully you guys remember that. And it's involved in maturation of T cells. It also secretes hormones, but in this case, these hormones only act upon the thymus. Basically, these hormones are involved in signaling or stimulating T cell maturation as well, since that's what the thymus does, or mainly what it does. And so we're not going to discuss the thymus anymore in the endocrine section. So I thought it was prudent to just quickly discuss it here. Okay, so at this point, you may pause and do your practice labels with the sticker sheet and the model images. And once you're comfortable with that, feel free to move on to the virtual labeling activity, which is also present on Blackboard. So from this point on, I'm going to focus on the hormones and the pituitary gland. I want to start by going over the principal hormones secreted by the endocrine glands. So several of these hormones may have alternate names that end in tropin. I will try to remember to mention them, but I'm likely to forget them after the first couple. But keep this in mind. You should notice this in your reading as well. So the anterior pituitary is going to secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. This is also called corticotropin. We also have thyroid stimulating hormone, human growth hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, prolactin, and luteinizing hormone. These all come from the anterior pituitary. Now, the hypothalamus, in combination with the posterior lobe of the pituitary, also secrete hormones. They secrete antidiuretic hormone, ADH, and oxytocin. The pineal gland, which I mentioned previously, secretes melatonin. The thyroid secretes two hormones we call T3 and T4. It also secretes calcitonin. Parathyroid secretes parathyroid hormone. And then the atria of the heart secretes ANP. The adrenal cortex. Now, the adrenal cortex secretes hormones that come in three different categories. So these are the mineralocorticoids, the glucocorticoids, and the gonadal hormones. So an example of the first one is aldosterone. The second one, the glucocorticoids, is cortisol, and the gonadal hormones, an example of that would be testosterone and DHEA in females. Testosterone, of course, in males. The adrenal medulla, so this is in the adrenal gland. The adrenal medulla secretes epinephrine, which is also known as adrenaline and norepinephrine. The kidney secretes calcitriol and EPO, or erythropoietin. The pancreatic islets, so specific cells within the pancreas, secrete insulin and glucagon. We should already know those are involved in glucose, blood glucose regulation. The ovaries secrete estrogens and progesterone. The testes secrete testosterone. So how these hormones work in the body can range from very simple to complex. In the simplest case, only one hormone is involved. For example, the endocrine cells respond to a change by releasing a hormone, and then that secreted hormone then adjusts the activities of its target cell. So, for example, hormones secreted by the heart, pancreas, parathyroid glands, and digestive tract are all controlled by this type of stimuli. We call that humoral stimuli. These hormones are direct short-term responses, and they don't need a master controller. So, for example, an example of this type, blood glucose levels will increase. This will trigger the pancreas to secrete insulin. The insulin will then bind to cell receptors, which are its target, and this will promote glucose uptake. Ultimately, this will decrease glucose present in the blood. Okay. Other hormones secretion may be controlled by hormonal stimuli, such as changes in the levels of circulating hormones. These controls may involve one or more intermediate steps and more than one hormone, so they may involve one or two hormones. So these hormones will control or coordinate more sophisticated body activities, and so they may need a master control from the brain's body control center, which we would call the hypothalamus. This typically involves the master gland called the anterior pituitary. So, for example, neurons in the hypothalamus synthesize thyrotropin releasing hormone, or TRH. It travels to the anterior pituitary where it binds a TRH receptor, and that stimulates the release of thyroid synthesizing or thyroid stimulating hormone. Before we delve into the anterior pituitary, let's take a second to discuss the levels of hormone regulation in this master gland system. So releasing hormones are at the top tier of this regulatory system. These are signals that release another hormone. So they're just like their name sounds. Releasing hormones trigger the release of additional hormones. They're going to be secreted by the hypothalamus, sent to the anterior pituitary gland, and they'll cause the release of tropic hormones by that pituitary gland. So this is the hormones that are released in response. Tropic hormones have other endocrine glands as their target. So these are hormones released that then target another endocrine gland, not a target cell. They're going to be secreted by the anterior pituitary mostly, sent to another endocrine gland, and they're going to cause the release of signal hormones. So a signal hormone in this case is a hormone that's going to actually interact with its target organ, affecting change. These are secreted by an endocrine gland, of course. Then they are sent to their target organ, and they're going to cause some kind of change. For example, that change may be a return to homeostasis. This is not always the case. That's just an example. So the hypothalamus controls the production of hormones in the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. And so we're going to go through this chart, which summarizes the tropic hormones released by that anterior pituitary. So starting on the upper left, CRH, or corticotropin releasing hormone, stimulates the release of ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, aka corticotropin. This targets the adrenal cortex and results in the release of the signal hormone cortisol. GHRH, or growth hormone releasing hormone, stimulates the release of human growth hormone. This is a somatotropin. This targets the liver, causing it to release the signal hormone IGF. That's just a bunch of growth factors. GnRH, or gonadotropin releasing hormone, stimulates the release of luteinizing hormone, or LH, as well as FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone. LH targets the ovaries and uterus, causing them to secrete estrogen. It targets the Leydig cells of the testes in males, causing them to release testosterone. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, targets the ovaries and testes as well. It causes the ovaries to secrete progesterone. The testes are also targeted, but it does not cause them to release a hormone in response. Now, the next one requires two actions. So we have a decrease in dopamine coupled with an increase in PRH, which is prolactin-releasing hormone. This stimulates the anterior pituitary to release prolactin. Prolactin targets the mammary glands, resulting in functional development of the mammary gland. It does not release another hormone in response. Finally, thyroid-releasing hormone stimulates release of thyroid-stimulating hormone, aka thyrotropin. This targets the thyroid gland, causing it to release the thyroid hormones. Okay, so this is a good little summary of how these releasing hormones affect the anterior pituitary, which then releases hormones that are going to target a specific gland, and then that gland may or may not release additional hormones. Those, of course, will go on to some sort of effector. All right, so this is a summary of all the pituitary hormones. It's located in a PowerPoint presentation on Blackboard. If you need to, please use it as a reference. And this last slide is just a summary slide. I suggest you use this to go through the hormones released by the anterior pituitary, concentrating on the releasing hormones produced by the hypothalamus and the target hormones and the target organs these anterior pituitary hormones act on. Ultimately, you're going to need to know the effects of these hormones all the way through to the effector organ, tissue, or cell. And that is it for this presentation.